written all over it. President Trump's take on the tanker attacks yesterday. The chips are down. Broadcom's forecasts send a trade war warning. And the Swiss strike back. Women across Switzerland walking out of work, calling for greater equality. It's Friday. Let's make a move. Welcome once again to First Move. Happy Friday, and a happy Friday for stock investors. Again, we are just 2% away from record highs. I'll be asking throughout the show, is that justified ultimately, as I walk you through the fallout from the tensions in the Middle East and what we saw yesterday with the tanker attacks, but also some pretty concerning data from around the world too. Right now, US futures a little bit softer. We did manage 0.5% gains yesterday despite those tensions that I mentioned. The energy sector, of course, performing well. Today, though, it's all about the tech sector, especially the chip stocks. Broadcom dashing hopes of a business pickup later this year. The trade war, Huawei, you mentioned it. We've got all the details for you in a second. Everywhere you look, though, I'm seeing signs of broader concerns. The weight of the trade war filtering in here. China, retail sales numbers there held up pretty well, I have to say, but the industrial output numbers, those growing at the weakest pace in 17 years. The US version is out in 15 minutes, so we'll be all over that. But for now, we did see solid retail sales numbers in line with estimates. The US consumer remains resilient, but hey, before we get too excited, compare and contrast. Morgan Stanley's US Business Conditions Index has just had the biggest monthly drop on record. Fine, it's just 1 month, and we did see a pullback in the stock markets in May, of course, too. But now, more than 600 US firms warning the US government about further Chinese tariffs. We'll talk about that too, but all sorts of signs here and warnings. Don't do more, please, the US government. What's going on in the energy sector? US oil prices steady today after that 4% rise that we saw yesterday after the twin tanker attacks. The US firmly blaming Iran, and tensions, of course, not easing there. But you have to argue here the dominant driver for prices is bumper US supply and weaker demand fears. Let's break this down, get to the drivers. Iran has said the US government's tanker accusations are, quote, sad and a suspicious act, while the US says this footage shows the Iranian Navy removing an unexploded mine from one of those crippled tankers. Donald Trump just told Fox News that the incident had Iran written all over it. Listen in.
Well, Iran did do it, and you know they did it because you saw the boat. I guess one of the mines didn't explode, and it's probably got essentially Iran written all over it. And you saw the boat at night trying to take the mine off and successfully took the mine off the boat. Yep. And that was exposed, and that was their boat, that was them. And they didn't want the evidence left behind. I guess they don't know that we have things that we can detect in the dark that work very well.
All right, we've got John Defterios for us in Abu Dhabi. Fred Pleitgen is in Tehran for us too. Fred, I'm going to come to you first. Extraordinarily quick to accuse the Iranians here, whether it was Mike Pompeo, of course, and the president this morning. Yeah. But talk us through this video as well and the evidence perhaps that provides.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Julia. And the Iranians really aren't very happy about the fact that the U.S. was very quick to point the finger at Tehran. First of all, of course, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, and then what we've just seen now, President Trump essentially saying the same thing. Now, according to the U.S. military, what's going on in that video, the U.S. says, is that this was taken a long time after that attack initially took place. The U.S. said it already had a ship in the area, but that little patrol boat from the Iranians then came up to one of those stricken tankers, came up to the side, and that essentially the U.S. says the crew of that Iranian patrol boat then took an object off the side of that tanker, which the U.S. believes may have been an unexploded sea mine, and was therefore trying to get rid of some of the evidence the U.S. believes against Iran. Now, the Iranians, of course, having none of that, saying that these are false accusations that are being levied by the United States. There's one senior Iranian lawmaker who came out and essentially says the main suspects in all this are the U.S. intelligence services and the Israelis, obviously also not offering any sort of evidence to back that up. But you can really feel how the rhetoric certainly isn't being toned down in any way, shape, or form, Julia, and in fact is indeed being heated up. On the one hand, you had President Trump and his accusations that we heard just there, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, and on the other hand, you have the Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif, who just a few minutes ago, he's at an economic forum right now, tweeted the following, saying that unilateral U.S. actions, including its economic terrorism on Iran, are solely responsible for insecurity and renewed tensions in our region. So the Iranians not only saying they didn't do it, but they're the ones who are saying that the U.S. is the one that's fanning the flames in the greater Middle Eastern region. Julia?
Yeah, I think the foreign minister said it was warmongering, the accusations from the United States here. I mean, I think everybody here is wondering, what now? We've seen a ratcheting up of the tensions, the accusations from the United States on Iran. They're accusing the U.S. of economic terrorism here. What now?
Well, the big question is, are these two sides able to walk this back right now? Is there going to be some sort of way to move forward to try and essentially prevent this from escalating any further? Certainly right now what the U.S. is saying is that all this is being investigated, that apparently authorities are out there at those two tanker boats and trying to see what exactly happened there. But the U.S., of course, has now already laid the finger of blame at the Iranians. And if we look at Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's press conference yesterday, he wasn't just saying that. He was also saying the other tanker attacks were also done by Iran. He was accusing the Iranians of an attack on a pipeline in Saudi Arabia, its ally, the Houthis, coming from Yemen. So also laying the finger of blame at the Iranians for a lot of things that are going on in the greater Middle Eastern region, and essentially accusing them of destabilizing the region. Now, of course, as you can imagine, the Iranians, for their part, are not happy about that at all. And if you looked at yesterday, when the supreme leader of Iran met with Shinzo Abe, the prime minister of Japan, he said, look, it's not even worth negotiating with someone like President Trump. He said he wouldn't even give President Trump an answer when President Trump wanted those trying to start those negotiations with the Iranians. So right now, it's going to be very, very difficult to try and prevent this from escalating any further, Julia.
Yeah, and that is quite fascinating to me, or the reaction that we saw in the oil markets yesterday, and John, the lack of reaction that we're seeing today, despite what is an escalation of tensions here. And to Fred's point, too similar to our reporting, events within a month. JD, what do you make of it? There's clearly other dominant factors here for investors that are weighing on oil prices.
Well, it's extraordinary because we're in a risk-on environment, as we're talking about here. You've had the tanker attacks, an attack against a pumping station for Saudi Aramco, even an airport in Saudi Arabia, and it's just barely moving the needle. But I think there's three key factors at play here that are impacting prices. First and foremost, the U.S. trade sanctions, whether against China, Iran, Venezuela, Mexico, or the threats against Mexico, it's hitting demand. The International Energy Agency put out its latest report saying that daily demand growth is now down to just 1.2 million barrels a day, sharply lower than last year. U.S. production is surging, Julia. The expectation is between 2018 and by the end of this year, the U.S. is going to add 3.5 million barrels a day. It's like adding another UAE to the energy market, and it's a major OPEC producer. And finally, we see that the call on OPEC production right now is at the lowest level since 2014. It's below 30 million barrels a day. So the U.S. is rising. It's forcing OPEC to cut back. Iran, Venezuela, Libya all see the production lower. At the end of the day, the two key players in the OPEC, non-OPEC stratosphere right now, Saudi Arabia and Russia, are looking at the 5-year moving average. Because of the uncertainty of the economy right now, inventories are growing. So this is going to put pressure on them at their next meeting in Vienna not to release more oil onto the market and perhaps make a deeper cut. This will be an interesting meeting because they have Iran and Venezuela at the table, with U.S. sanctions hammering away at those two countries, with the U.S., Saudi Arabia, and UAE partners here with the pressure on against Iran.
Yeah, and we're talking non-stop about the back and forth between the United States and the Iranians here, but there are other countries involved, particularly in the region right now. John, what are they saying about this situation, just keeping a little bit quiet here?
Well, they don't like the idea that we could stumble into war. This is the definition here constantly. So we have this access of power against Iran. I would include Israel in the mix, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain and Egypt. And this could be something that could trigger something much worse in the oil markets if it spirals out of control. You know, it's interesting because I've been in this oil market for 25 years. You go back to the Gulf War, for example, the Iran-Iraq War, the invasion of Iraq, even the removal of Colonel Gaddafi. Julia, we'd see spikes 10 to 15% with anything around the Strait of Hormuz. And right now we saw a blip going up 4.5%, losing the gains entirely. And we have to take a step back. We're in a bear market since the end of April. We've lost $15 or about 20%, whether it's WTI or North Sea Brent. There's just too much oil around, and the United States is going to go past 13 million barrels a day while President Trump's pressure on sanctions is slowing down global growth. That's the reality and why the market's not reacting to the pressure we have in this region.